Bones! Today we're going to take a look at 3 simple poncho shelters along with some tarp shelters. That way you don't leave your bones behind. Hey guys, Lucas here in Venture Surplus, and today we're going to take a look at the basics of tarp and poncho shelters. So we're going to look at the basics. We're going to keep this video pretty short, and the reason we're keeping it basic and short is because in order to do these, you got to get outside and do them. So this is kind of got to be a guide, an intro to how to do this, and maybe go over some things you might not have known beforehand. But you got to get outside and you got to practice these, whether it's your backyard, going out to the park, or going out to the woods, because the last thing you want is it to be 15 minutes before dark, it's raining, and it's the first time you ever set up a shelter up, and it's an emergency situation. So we're going to look at what you need to do it, some considerations, and then 3 forms of shelters, 2 of them being the most common shelters, and then 1 being an emergency, kind of just like, I got to get into something really quick. So let's get into the basics of tarp shelters. So what do you need to set up a tarp or poncho shelter? Well, as in the name, you need a tarp or a poncho. So I have issued poncho right here and issued tarp right here. Issued ponchos have gotten a lot harder to find since they stopped issuing them, and they've been replaced with tarps. So you do have the option to go get like an issued poncho or an issued tarp that is military issue. They can be ruggedized, they can be rubberized, and they're gonna be heavy duty, and they're gonna last you because they're gonna be waterproof and windproof. So if you don't have those available or can't find one for whatever reason, any good durable poncho or tarp is gonna do the trick. Now, you're gonna wanna inspect it before you use it. So if you buy one for this kind of purpose, take a look at it, get a feel for it. Is it actually gonna last you under some stress? Because the blue tarps from Walmart, they do the trick, but they're not really durable and they don't have a good long life. You can punch a hole in that thing pretty quick. If you scrape it against a tree, there's a good chance you can put a slash through it. So just pay attention to how durable the tarp or poncho you have is, because otherwise it may fall apart. Now, other things you want are 550 cord and stakes. So let's take a look at 550 cord and some tent stakes. All right, so aside from poncho and tarp, like I said, you want some 550 cord and some tent stakes. Now 550 cord, you can have just like a big 100-foot spool, something like a ready rope, but at a minimum, I do recommend having 50 feet of cordage. Now 50 feet is gonna get you where you need to go. This gives you enough to tie it off to trees, it runs some stakes, runs some guy lines and stuff like that. And if you're in a pinch, you can gut that 550 cord and have the sheath of it and have the innards and have 100 feet of cordage. So I do recommend 50 feet, but having more is not a bad idea. Just 50 feet at a minimum. Now from there, you're gonna want some stakes. 2 to 4 stakes is pretty much gonna get you covered. So just your lightweight 10 stakes are gonna do the trick. And just be prepared to be able to maybe have to make more out in the field. So taking a tree limb, something like that, cutting it down with your knife, or hatchet or saw, and just using that as additional points for guy lines to attach to, just adding stability to your shelter in general. But 4 will get you where you need to go in general with pretty much any basic form of tarp or poncho shelter. So that's what you need, and this is all going to fit in your backpack pretty well. So let's go into some considerations of why you would be using this and kind of the when and where. So when would you be using a poncho or tarp shelter? Well, in essence, it's the most basic form of shelter, and it's great for emergency purposes. So if you're out there, you're doing a long day hike, and you know you're gonna be out there late or the weather turns bad, this is a way to get you shelter for overnight and to protect you from the elements. So at the most basic form, it's an emergency form of shelter. For those longer hikes, if you just wanna have a sunshade or protection from the elements, or you're out for the day, doing a day hike or something like that, it's a great way to provide some protection then, maybe not an emergency situation. And then from there, some people do treat it as an ultra light form of shelter for like longer hauls backpacking. Now tents these days are really, really light. So, you can get a tent that kind of fulfills that role and that weight aspect, but it is pretty light. But there's things you want to add to your packing list if this is going to be your sole form of shelter. And then from there, it has attachable applications. So if you're ever in the U.S. Army or the Marine Corps, you're infantry or attached infantry, you most likely found yourself in the field having to live under these for some amount of time for wherever you're at. So it does have attachable applications because it's a low signature shelter in places that you might not want to be in. So those are kind of areas you're going to find yourself using these in. But emergency is the biggest one, and that's where we're kind of focusing here is the emergency aspect and the fun aspect of it too, being able to set a shelter up wherever you're at. So let's look into some considerations you might want to think about when you're setting these up. So the first thing that should kind of be on your mind when you're setting these up is when do they work best? Now, a tent and a poncho shelter are basic forms of shelter, and they work best in fair weather. Now you might ask yourself, well, I'm packing this for an emergency situation where the weather might be more severe. They do work, and they keep the worst of the weather off of you, but even just with a tent, it's gonna work best in good weather. Now, so that's something you want to consider though when you're using these, and if you're packing this as your primary means of shelter is, you might want to pack some more wet weather gear, definitely have a baby sack in your backpack, stuff like that. That way you can keep the worst of the wind and rain off you when you're sleeping under something like this. So fair weather is the best use, and to keep the sun off of you in the light rain and the light wind. But once that rain picks up, once that wind picks up, you're going to start seeing that they do the thing, but it's not going to be comfortable underneath them. But that's fine in an emergency situation because it's an emergency situation and it's doing what it can for you. And in a tactical environment, you just got to deal with it as it is anyways. So from there, things to consider are wind and rain. So let's talk about wind and rain considerations. So when we're talking about the wind and the rain, what I want to talk about is the direction they're coming from. Now that really kind of means you have to know the prevailing direction of the wind. So prevailing winds come from this direction, and most times storms are going to come from this direction. So in Colorado, when you're on the Front Range or the plains, most of the wind comes from the south-southeast. So I set this up to help me out to block the worst of the wind. So I'd set this up where the back of it is facing south-southeast, and I'm facing when I'm sitting in there north-northeast or north-northwest. So that's something you want to pay attention to. So if you're out there in the woods or out in the open or something like that, and you're setting up these as your shelter, just kind of try and pick out where the wind's coming from and then how you want to block it. Now, the same goes with rain. Rain can be a little more unpredictable as far as direction is going to fall on you, but do the best you can there. I do understand it changes, the wind changes, but if you can get it directed towards prevailing winds to block that off you, you're a little better off. Now from there, your terrain can help there too. So you want to look at your terrain and what's around you because that can help block wind, block some rain off of you. But there's things to consider with that as well. So let's take a look at location, and then we'll finally get into how to set these up. So we're talking about location, we're thinking about safety. So safety comes in a lot of forms. We're thinking about the place we're going to lay down in an emergency or tactical or even just for recreational purposes. So first thing we're going to look at is where we're laying down. Is that a floodplain? Is it going to get flooded out if it rains really hard and stuff like that? So you can pick out floodplains kind of because the lowest point in the ground in your area, it's a greener area, especially if it's been dry. That's going to be the greenest kind of area, a lot of green vegetation, greener trees, more trees, just heavy vegetation in general. Is it a dried up riverbed? Because you don't want to set up in a riverbed, even though it's going to take the wind off you really well. If it does flood, does rain hard, you're going to be washed out. That's not a good time. So you want to really pay attention to, am I setting up where rain is going to be an issue? So if you're in between two hills, it might flow down right onto you if you're on the low ground. So you want to go up a little bit. And then the wind can get caught in between hills and valleys too. But this is all just stuff that comes with kind of experience with being outside and the kind of environment you're going to be in. So if you have any experience being in those mountains, those hills, those plains, those fields, draw from them to pick out the best places to set up. Now from there, you want to look up at trees. Now this is kind of just basic tent and camping etiquette, or just knowledge, but look for dead trees and dead tree limbs, and you don't want to set up underneath them or near them, because if that falls, it's going to punch straight through your shelter or through your tent, everything like that. So look up, look for dead trees, look for dead tree limbs, and make sure you're not setting up directly underneath one. And then going from there, critters. So when you're laying on the ground or out in the open, you want to look at, are there any holes underneath me? That could be snake holes, prairie dog mounds, because you don't want to set up in the middle of a prairie dog colony or something like that. Stuff like that. Make sure there's no ant mounds, stuff like that underneath you, because laying on top of that could end up being a very bad day and night. So just look at where you're laying down. Is the vegetation really thick? Am I laying on top of briars? You can use some of the vegetation to help block off a side of your shelter, just kind of blocking a avenue of entry into your A-frame or something like that. And it is kind of a good idea because it's a deterrent for critters. Now, if something wants to get into your shelter with you underneath it, they're going to get in there. but it can help kind of deter them. So all things you consider, a lot of it just comes from getting outside, setting these up. So now let's look at how to set these up. So like I said in the beginning, we're going to cover 3 ways to make a shelter. We're going to cover A-frame, a lean-to, and then a pretty emergency, low effort way to just get under something that's kind of a shelter. So the best place to set these up is in wooded environments. So if you're on the East Coast, you're going to be pretty good to go. If you're on the West Coast, pretty good to go. But if you're stuck in the middle like us, near the Rockies and in the plains kind of area where there's a lot of open ground, you might not have woods near you all the time. But best place to set these up is in the woods. If you're out in the open, you're going to look for places that you can set this up with a good place to tie off to. Now that might mean carrying poles with you. It might mean finding sticks. If you can find a fence line, that is a good spot to start because you can tie off to fence posts. Now that might be pretty wide, but you can start with at least one, work right from there. That's where more than 50 feet of cordage really comes into play because you might need a ton of cordage. But you want to look for somewhere that at least has 1 to 2 good points to tie down to, and then use those additional items you might have on you, such as hiking poles or poles in general, or the ability to cut up sticks that you can find around you. So enough of additional considerations. Let's get into how to make an A-frame shelter out of a tarp or a poncho. So the first one we're looking at is the A-frame. This is kind of your classic shelter kind of look to it. You're taking your tarp or your poncho, going long ways, taking it out the middle and tying off the trees. So best case scenario, you have 2 trees that are 6 to 7 feet apart, or whatever the length of your tarp or poncho is, and you're going to tie off from there, and then you're going to drape your tarp or poncho from there down off to the sides. And you're going to guy line out those sides so they're nice and taut, so that way if any rain or wind coming down on you, just gets directed off. Height wise, about waist level is a good guideline. You can set up lower, you can set up higher, just depends on how you kind of want to do, but waist-ish, chest level is good to go. Underneath there, you can fit you pretty well. You can fit 2 people if you snuggle up pretty close, but you and your gear, if you have a backpack, is going to fit under there pretty well. It's going to do a pretty good job protecting you. So the A-frame, pretty simple, a pretty standard layout. Complications that might arise is you only have 1 tree to tie off to. So that might be where you have another pole to simulate the extra tree. You're going to guy line off that pretty well, but stuff like that. So getting out there and practicing in a good environment where 2 trees are close together, and then a bad environment where you only have 1 tree and you have to guy line off the other side is a good thing to do and a good thing to practice. That's the A-frame. Let's look at a more simple shelter, and one you're probably already familiar with as well, the lean-to. So the lean-to, it's a little more simple than the A-frame, a little quicker to set up and offers a little less protection, but it is quicker to set up and offers good protection from prevailing winds and hard rain from one direction. So for this one, same kind of basics to start off with is find 2 trees or 2 poles or something you can set up that are about 6 to 7 feet apart, and you're going to take one in and set it up about waist or chest high between those 2 trees by tying it off. And then from there, you're going to drape down and angle the backside of your poncho or tarp towards the wind or the rain, wherever you're going to think it's going to come from. Now, when you sit under there, your back's going to be towards the wind. It's going to hit that tarp or hit that rain. The rain's going to hit the tarp and protect you from that. So pretty basic protection. You have one big old open side, but if you have hard rain or hard wind from one direction, pretty good to go. Plenty of room to sit under it in. You can lay down, get your gear under there, and get you good protection. That is a little less than the A-frame, but still really good to go. So lean-to, really fast, really basic, but does the trick really well. I'd say just kind of like with the A-frame, you might want to set up more guy lines to help keep it taut if there's heavy wind or heavy rain, just so it doesn't like kind of bleed through. And I used a poncho in this example, and so one thing you want to pay attention to when you think of poncho with a center hole hood is tie that thing up, because otherwise you have a big old hole in your shelter. So tie it up and close that off so rain and wind doesn't get through there. One thing this can do easier than an A-frame can is on the open side, sitting there, you can have a small fire or your stove right there and not worry about it, fumes or smoke getting under your A-frame and kind of being a bad day. So kind of nice because you can do that, but a little overall less protection than the A-frame. So pretty simple. Now let's look at the most simple and kind of quickest way to set up a tarp or poncho as a shelter. And this is more for, oh crap, it's starting to pour, the wind's getting really bad, I can't go any further right now, so I just need to get under something, so I'm going to do this. So this last one is super basic, and all you're going to do is you're going to take, and this is great for a really emergency situation where you're out there and it's already maybe getting late, maybe the weather's already been turning bad, and you're trying to hustle back to wherever your car or trailhead is to get help. and the weather turns and it starts raining real hard, the wind gets real hard. You're just gonna pull your tarp or poncho out, loosely stake out the corners, and crawl underneath that thing. That one, you don't want to set it up too tightly as far as tautness with it staked out, because it's gonna be too tight to crawl underneath it. But that's all you're really gonna do. Stake out the four corners a little loosely, get under there with your gear, and get out of the worst of it. Again, this is really emergency. This is not a long-term shelter. You're getting under there and you're keeping off the worst of the elements from you. You might have some water creep under there, but at the end of the day, you're out of the worst of it. So that's the last one. That's the most simple, and that's the one to use if just everything is not going your way, but you need to go under some sort of actual waterproof, windproof shelter. So let's tie this video up. All right, so that was the basics of tarp shelters, poncho shelters, real quick and simple. And like I said in the beginning, I'm gonna reiterate this again for however many times. Get some practice before you have to do this, and it's 15 minutes till dark, and it's raining and pouring on you, and it's an emergency kind of situation. So go outside, go in your backyard, find some trees, tie it off to your fence, go to the park, set some shade up for you and your girlfriend or your wife and kids, or go to your buddies next time you go out in the mountains to the range or something like that. Set one of these up and use it, get a feel for it and how fast you can do it and what you need to do it in the first place. So appreciate you watching this one. We've had some requests in the past of like doing more bushcrafty or skills like this. Do have quite a bit of experience doing this kind of stuff, especially growing up. So leave a comment below with what kind of stuff you'd like to see in the future. More stuff like this if you want to. And if you ever use one of these kind of shelters, whether it be out in the woods or in the military, leave a comment below with the kind of things that made your life a little better when you were underneath one or made it a little easier for you to set one up. But appreciate you watching. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe. We do like to carry tarps, both USGI and aftermarket tarps on the website, so check that link out below if you need to pick one up, see what's in stock, and sign up for emails if we're out of stock so you're the first one to know when we do get them in stock. But appreciate you watching. Thanks for watching. See you next time.